Okay, so earlier on when I made a video on marked decks, I briefly touched on a concept named the edge marking. So this will just be a very simple application of the concept, in which case it will always mostly be used as a key card because it's not that specific of a marking. There are some edge marking concepts out there which are a lot more specific, but this one in particular is mostly, and I say mostly because there are other specific cases where it can be used elsewhere, it will mostly be used as a key card. So while it's not exactly the most exciting application, it does serve as a good introduction to the concept of edge marking overall. Now one can argue that the first edge mark deck was actually unintentionally created. So if you take any boardless deck, like a B deck for example, here you can see that the long edge of the deck over here, well, they all follow this same striped pattern like so on the long edge of the deck. But if you reverse one card, so you say the Queen of Spades, you reverse it, now you'll notice that one card in particular sticks out like a sore thumb. This is because of USPCC or any other printing companies, well, their flaws in their cutting process, right? Because it's a repeating pattern, there's chances that this cutting might not be exact every single time. Hence why if you actually reverse one single card, now it sticks out like a sore thumb. It means that now the Queen of Spades is marked in the deck, right? So if I wanted to cut to it, I can just lift up to it and I would cut to the Queen of Spades because it is just sticking out like a sore thumb unless I reverse it back to its original position, right? So the first edge mark deck was actually just any other patterned back design, but it was unintentionally created because of, well, the flaws of the playing card printing process. Now, an intentionally created edge marking system was actually first found in New Era card tricks back in 1897 by August Roderberg. This would be used in an effect called extraordinary restoration, where it's sort of interesting because it's actually where the Ace of Spades, right? So the thin edges, right, of the Ace of Spades would actually be inked, right? And that way, if you actually place the Ace of Spades in the deck, you would actually be able to find it anywhere, and then you'll be able to force it. Well, in the case of the effect, you actually use it as a force. So that's one card being edge marked, right, in particular. But the idea of intentionally printing an entirely edge marked deck came from Theodore Deland. So Theodore Deland actually came up with a deck called the Wonder Deck back in 1915, which was only actually on sale for about a couple of months before it actually pulled off of the market, and then the rest of the decks were actually destroyed. So there's actually a while back, Richard Kaufman actually made a reprint of the deck along with a book compiling most of, if not all, of Theodore Deland's work. So in that book, he actually reveals that it might be actually because casinos actually feared the Wonder Deck, right? Because imagine you had a seemingly ordinary deck of cards, and you didn't even need to look at the complete backs of the back design, right? And you could still find out where every card was and what each card was just from looking at the long edge. That would be quite catastrophic for casinos, right? So Richard Kaufman theorized that the casinos were like, okay, you can't sell the Wonder Deck because that's just going to screw everyone over. So that's a theory as to why the Wonder Decks were actually just destroyed. Okay, so that's the history behind the first intentionally marked edge mark deck printed in history. But the edge marking system that we're going to talk about comes from Ferrelli's Card Magic Part 2 back in 1933 by Victor Ferrelli. So this is a concept called the tail of the queue, and much like naturally formed or made edge markings, this does slightly revolve around the fact that playing cards are flawed in terms of printing. So it does exploit a flaw in playing cards, and also you will need to put in a bit of work into the playing cards. So those are two caveats, is that this exploits a specific flaw in the printing system, and also you do need to put in some work as well. But one funny thing is that in the section following the description of the tail of the queue, so that is an additional section called a suggestion, Victor Ferrelli actually mentioned a deck that was edgemark, printed in America, and had a borderless back design. He doesn't really mention the deck by name, but I'm sure that we can all guess that he's talking about, well, Theodore Deland's Wonder deck. But that about does it for our brief history section on edge markings, right? So yeah, without further ado, let's get into the work behind this specific edge marking. So before we start, we do need a couple of things. So the first thing that we need is either a red or a black Sharpie, preferably both. You'll want a Sharpie with a smaller nib. So here I have a Sharpie pen. So what this is basically just a super fine Sharpie. So this is, from what I remember, 0.38 millimeters thin. So this is about the size of the Sharpie that you want. And again, you want, depending on whether or not you want like a black card or a red card marked, you would want a black Sharpie or a red Sharpie. Okay, I don't really have red Sharpies in the house, mainly because they dry out because no one uses them, but both are necessary if you do want to mark red cards and black cards, okay? Next, you'll need to find specific cards for this sort of work. So the book tells you to either use queens, kings, or aces, right? The next thing that you'll need is that, well, you'll need to further filter out these cards. And the next thing that you'll want is that you'll want the cards with the biggest misalignments. So if you're familiar with USPCC and their lack of quality control for better or for worse, right? You'll notice that the back design, well, it's never really centered on the playing card, right? You'll always notice that one part in particular, right? It's always shifted, right? So one part of the border isn't necessarily thicker than the other, right? So here I can tell that this part is thicker than this side over here, right? Here I can tell that this side is thinner than this side, right? So, and here that's a blue card, but but yes, you can tell that this part is thinner and over here is thicker, okay? So you'll find that, well, there is some misalignment in USPCC playing cards and other playing card companies in particular as well, but this misalignment is actually what we're looking for, because this way, because of the misalignment, one of the indices will actually be closer to the long edge, and that makes the marking actually better. Okay, so we're going to be looking for the indices that are closer to the long edge, like so, okay? But if you want a deck that pretty much always has misalignments, get a few Bicycle Metal Lux decks, right? They look pretty and they're shiny, but they're always misaligned for some reason. I can't tell you why, but the Bicycle Metal Lux series, they're always misaligned. Like, I can't tell you why. Even more so than normal bikes, okay? So yeah, if you can't find any misaligned decks, that's what you would go for, okay? So those are the three requirements, is that you have to find a thin Sharpie, an ace, queen, or king, and then you would have to find a misaligned deck, okay? Doesn't have to be USBCC, it just has to be misaligned, okay? The next thing that you're gonna do is that you're just gonna take your Sharpie and you're gonna find the edge that is actually the closest to the long edge, okay? So in this instance, you'll notice that this side in particular is actually closer to the long edge than this side, okay? And that's what we're looking for. So over here, if you notice the king, it has two vertical edges, two horizontal lines over here, right? One over here, one over here. The queen has one over here, and the ace has one over here, okay? What we're going to do is that we're actually use our Sharpie, and we're going to extend this line until it's about, so Victor Ferrelli actually suggests that you extend this line up to about 1/32 of an inch from the long edge of the card, which is about 0.8 millimeters. So it's it's definitely a very specific number. So yeah. Anyways, it's a very specific number, but you might as well just trace it all the way at that point, but I digress. So you're gonna take your Sharpie, you're gonna find the letter that is closest to the long edge, and you're just gonna carefully use your Sharpie and extend this line, right? Until it is nearly touching the long edge of the deck, right? So obviously this does look stupid because it is so far away from the edge, right? But if you take something that's slightly closer, so pretend our king over here, you can either take this this horizontal line or this horizontal line, doesn't really matter, right? You can take this one and extend it, right, until it is 1/32 of an inch closer to the edge over here, right? And then you can do the same thing to your queen as well, right? Take this, extend it, and there we go. Right, so now we have extended all our lines, and there we go. Now we have edge mark cards. And now you see why we can't use jacks, because if we actually use jacks, you'll see that the horizontal line at the top is too far away from the long edge of the deck, which means that if you try to extend this line, it'll look quite ridiculous, more so than these already, right? So the another thing about this sort of edge marking system is that Victor Farelli actually says that you should actually extend the opposite indices line as well. But the problem with that is because this relies on an offset, this line will be much longer than this other one, right? So I would prefer to only mark one edge rather than both. Now, this does make it a one-way marking system, which I personally don't really have a problem with, since the only thing that really disrupts the orientation of a one-way marking system is sort of a casino wash, which I don't really do because they take too long in performance. So personally, I don't really mind just having one edge being marked, okay? But you can mark both if you want, but personally, I don't think it's necessary, mainly because it looks odd, and I would personally just don't find any use for it, okay? So those are our 3 edge marked cards, our ace, king, and queen. So as part of the book, Victor Farelli, based on Theodore Deland's Wonder Deck, also proposed something with borderless playing cards. He doesn't really describe it in a lot of detail, but we can sort of guess what he meant by the description just based on the tell of the cue. So if you have a borderless deck, you can sort of mess around and hide with the pattern of the borderless deck. So here I'm just gonna use his concept pretty directly. So over here, I marked all of the hearts, right? So over here, you can tell with a black ink marker or with the black Sharpie, I placed a vertical mark over here, starting from left to right. So the leftmost is gonna be an ace, and then the rightmost is gonna be a king over here. Okay, so that way you can actually tell which card is which in a spread or whichever, okay, just with the edge markings, okay? That way, like so, this is a lot more precise than just the ace, queen, and king marking. This way, you can actually tell which one is which card based on where the line is situated on, okay? So this will take some getting used to, but most people will only really need like the rightmost or the leftmost marking, mainly because the ace and the kings are the most important cards. But this is an additional concept that you can do based on Victor Ferrelli's suggestion, right? So just having one line over here, that's an ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, jack, queen, king. Okay, so it just goes from left to right like so. Okay, so that is something that is an alternative that you can do. So I'll just zoom in a bit. So over here, right? Ace, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, jack, queen, and then king is over here. Okay, so that is something that you can do. And again, I'm only doing it on one edge of the deck, but if you are going to do it on both edges of the deck, make sure that you're applying the work at around the same place, or else if you do like a casino wash or if you flip the deck over, it'll mess up with your perception. Okay, so just make sure that the edge marking is correct, and also don't use black on red and don't use black on blue as well. Make sure that you have the corresponding color with the back design. Okay. So that's just an additional idea that Victor Ferrelli actually suggested. Again, this is pretty much, you can refine these markings because again, this is purely based off of Victor Ferrelli's pretty vague suggestion of this. Personally, again, I would have a red Sharpie, and I would actually just color in the dots closest to the edge over here. So if you actually see the B back design, you'll notice that there are some triangles over here at the edge, at the very edge. Personally, I would just color those in, but again, I'm just putting vertical marks just so that it's easier to spot, and also just because it's the appropriate description. But if I really wanted to have something that's more subtle, I would just color in this specific triangle over here with red. Okay, so that's what I would be personally doing. But yeah, I honestly don't know why this isn't the main bulk of the idea, considering there's two things that actually set it apart from the tail of the queue. So the first thing is that you can mark every card, right? You can mark every card in the deck instead of the tail of the queue, which is only limited to the ace, queens, and kings. And then the second thing is that you can use the backs with this, right? For the tail of the queue, you can only use this, right, when the deck is face up, which is very, very rare, right, that you have the deck face up. So personally, I would just have I would much prefer this concept over the tail of the queue. But I imagine that Victor Ferrelli didn't want to put this as the main idea because it is essentially Theodore Deland's idea, so maybe he didn't want to put spotlight on that idea because it's not necessarily his idea, and so he wanted to put spotlight on his own idea, which is the tail of the queue. Okay, so yeah, that is just the additional suggestion that Victor Ferrelli gives in his book. Now, how do you use this edge marking? So traditionally, because of how edge markings are, they are typically done at the table where you have the long edge facing you, so then you can read the markings from here, right? Now, if you insert the edge mark card into the deck, like so, right? You won't be able to see it because it's applied on the face of the deck. So you'll have to turn this deck face up, which is unfortunate, but that is something that Victor Ferrelli points out, that you have to use this marking system face up, right? So assuming that you have the edge marked side facing you, and that you also have the deck face up, so if you actually have the deck sort of squared up and face up right now, you can't really see the marking, right? That's something that you have to notice. But if you actually bevel the deck away from you, right? So I actually just rock the deck just towards the audience, right? Now you'll notice that there's just the slightest and faintest black dot over here, right? Over here, I'll bring it up to the camera just so that you can see, right? So if this is squared up, you won't be able to see it, but if I bevel the deck like so, right, you'll spot just a faint black dot over here, right? Here. That is our edge marking, right? It's almost imperceptible even though you have this card edge marked. And this little black dot over here will be enough for you to do a couple of things with it. So in the book, Victor Ferrelli basically just tells you that you have two uses for this sort of edge marking, for this little subtle thing over here. One is that you can use it as a key card, right? So if I spot my black dot over here, well, now I know that if I had a selection below of it or above of it, now I know that my selection is in this area over here, right? The other thing is that I can use it as a force card. Because I always know where this card is, I can just maybe use it as a force card. So I'll be like, yeah, I can just like cut to it and then, yeah, that'll be it, right? So those are the two things that Victor Ferrelli points out that you can use this edge marking for, right? A key card and a force card where you're just always conscious of where this card is, right? The third use that you can use it for is for dead cutting, right? So if you want, you can of course dead cut to it. So you can go like, wait, hold on, I'll toss my ace in here. So if you want, you can take your ace, toss it in the deck. You can bevel the deck as per usual, where you can then spot your edge marked ace, and you can then just sort of riffle up on the deck, right? You can riffle up on the deck until you find the edge marking, and then you just you just cut to it, and then you cut to an ace, right? And of course, this can be applied to every other ace as well, so then you can dead cut to every ace out there as well. So because these cards aren't fully marked, they're only marked for values, and especially if you're just doing the tail of the queue, they only apply to maybe the ace, kings, and queens, right? They are fairly limited in terms of use, but if you have all three of them, so you have the ace and the king and the queens in the deck, right? Because of the way that you marked because of the way that the indices are, right? The vertical line will always be different for a queen compared to a king compared to an ace, right? So if you bevel the deck over here, you can tell exactly which one is an ace, which one's a king, and which one is a queen, okay? That way, if you want to produce all four aces, you can just instantly find them. You can also instantly find the kings, you can instantly find the queens, right? So then you can edge mark about 12 cards, right? You can edge mark the aces, edge mark the kings, edge mark the queens, right? Which means that now you have 12 like high value cards that you can have to your advantage for maybe things like a Four of a Kind production, right? Or alternatively, if you're doing the thing that that Victor Ferrelli suggested, which is trying to edge mark the backs of a boardless deck, here, if you want, you can go through the deck, right? And as you go through the deck, you can cull the Four of a Kind that you want, right? So because I edge marked all the values, I can cull the queen, for example, right? And then I could just find whatever that I want to do with them, right? And obviously I can go through, cull the rest of the queens as well, right? Without even looking at the faces, right? So that's something that you can do with a value only edge marked deck, right? Obviously you can do all this with just a normal like marking system as well, but the value of a edge marking is that you can do it from a squared up deck, right? From a slightly beveled squared up deck. That's the value of having an edge mark deck, okay? So even though this, again, these limitations mostly apply to this specific one because Victor Ferrelli's description is just like that. But there are edge marking systems that are a lot more refined, and I do want to say a lot more precise as well, okay? So don't be deterred by the fact that these are just partial marking systems. There are still a lot of uses for Victor Ferrelli's system, and there are still a lot of uses for edge markings in general. Again, this is just an introductory course, and this is a slightly dated method that I still believe has potential as well. Okay, so that's just how to use Victor Ferrelli's marking system. again, there are a lot of uses for edge marking systems despite this system. Now you might be wondering to yourself, well, where else can I read marking systems then, right? Edge marking systems in particular, because, well, this is the first time you're hearing about them or wherever. So there's a couple of sources that I can point you towards for edge marking systems. So the first one is D-Land, Mystery and Madness, written by Richard Kaufman, right? So that's the work where Richard Kaufman talks about the Wonder deck. Then there's Forelli's Card Magic by Victor Forelli. That's where the Tale of the Cube comes from. So I also highly encourage you to look into the original source as well. There's The Secret of the Butterflies by Andrei Panichka. There we go. Where he's the creator of the butterfly playing cards, and that's pretty much the most famous edge mark deck out there nowadays. So you can go ahead and look at that. The Secret of the Butterflies is a PDF or ebook that sort of describes the well, it's an ebook and a physical book as well, I believe. So that's where he describes a couple uses for an edge marking system, especially one as precise as the butterfly playing cards. There's the Collected Works of Alex Elmsley, Volume 2 by Alex Elmsley. There's also False Anchors by Ryan Schlitz. So there he also has an edge marked, or I believe a marked deck called the False Anchors. I'm not sure if he has a boardless version, because I know he does create the playing cards known as False Anchors, which are marked. I'm just not sure if they're edge marked, but he does have some work in that book concerning edge marking. So those are just a couple of resources that you can look at if you're interested in edge markings, and maybe edge markings that are a bit more precise than Victor Forelli's edge marking system. So again, this is just a introductory course to this. And so yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this brief introduction to the world of edge marking. Now I know that a lot of you will probably be slightly disappointed in that you can't really, you're not like, it's not like subtle enough or whatever, right? I don't really, but that's not the point of this. Again, this is purely an introductory course. That's why I decided to take something that's a bit more, I want to say, flawed and dated in terms of method. This method does still have its merits, I want to say, because, well, people don't really know of it. And I did sort of want to pull out something from history books that people might not know about. So it's flawed, yes. Is it still fun? Yes. So yeah. So this is obviously not a fully comprehensive guide. This was never meant to be a fully comprehensive guide, but this is purely meant to be what Victor Forelli described in his book, okay? So yeah. So can you actually fully edge mark a deck? Yes, of course, obviously, but that's not the course of that's not a point of this course again, right? How? Well, you'll just need to look at the sources that I gave in the section beforehand. So yeah, this was just a brief introductory course. And so yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this. Obviously, maybe not something that you guys will use, or maybe something that will obviously that some of you guys will be disappointed by this, but again, I just sort of wanted to open up just sort of the possibilities, right? And again, most of my videos are meant for you guys to really look deeper into the sources of the magic world, because a lot of people neglect looking deeper into magic sources. They only rely on YouTube, which is kind of annoying. So by presenting a flawed method but still giving like a slight hook, I think that I'm encouraging you guys to sort of look deeper into the magic world. So yeah, I think that about wraps it up for here today. Thanks for hanging out with me. Stay safe, stay healthy, and see you guys next time. And do your own proper research, I guess. Yeah. Take care.